Hello and welcome to the What's the Story podcast. I'm Jarlath Kyan.
And I'm Victoria Houston. Each week we'll be focusing on the stories that matter to you. Stories about the people and places that make Tyrone so special.
The What's the Story podcast is brought to you by the Northwest News Group, who also print our much-loved newspapers, the Ulster Herald, Strabane Chronicle and the Tyrone Herald. Enjoy the show.
It's just such an incredible story that somebody who came from, a small rural community in County Tyrone had made such an impact, not only in, you might say, changing the course of history in the American War of Independence, but then leaving a legacy in the dollar sign.
This week's podcast tells an incredible story of the life and legacy of Oliver Pollock. Pollock left Ireland in 1760 in search of a better life in America. Within a few years, he had become one of the country's most successful businessmen. During the American Revolution, he donated the equivalent today of £1 billion to the cause of the Patriots fighting for American independence. Alongside this, Pollock is also the man credited with creating the dollar sign, arguably the world's best known financial symbol. So how did a young man from the tiny Tyrone village of Bready leave such an important legacy? My name is Kieran O'Neill and I'm joined today by local historian Dr. William Ralston, who is somewhat of an expert on Pollock's story. William, thank you for joining us on the podcast. As I said, Pollock seems to have led an amazing life, but what do we know about him?
We know that Pollock was born about 1737. And we know that he came from the Bready area of County Tyrone. Now, the reason we know that is because of a letter that survives in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. I'll talk more presently about where Pollock was at the time, but it's a letter written by Oliver's brother, Charles, and it's dated the 10th of June, 1767, and it was written at Mason. And that allows us to sort of narrow down on the area in which Pollock came from. So, as I said, born in the Bready area about 1737. His father was Jared, which is a very distinctive first name. And interestingly, in a 1745 muster roll for the area, Jared Polk names appear. So Polk was another version of Pollock, P-O-A-K, or sometimes you can have the name P-O-L-K. They're all variations of the same name. So Jared Polk, as he was called at that time, appears in a muster roll for the Abercorn estate, and the Abercorns were the major landowners in the Bready area from the 17th century through to the beginning of the 20th century. So he grew up in a rural community. It was largely Presbyterian. It was largely composed of those who were descended from Scottish settlers in the 17th century. His family would have been involved in farming, and with all the challenges that brought in terms of price fluctuations, economic crises, agricultural depressions, even diseases in livestock that had a major impact on farming families, not to mention drought, harvest failures, severe storms, and so on. So, like many young men, and in Oliver's case, he seems to have been a younger son, so the opportunities for him here in Ireland were more limited. So, like many young men, he decided to try his fortune on the other side of the Atlantic.
And we seem to know that he emigrated in around 1760, but he was along with his father and an older brother. Did they emigrate at the same time? Or?
Yes, it's supposed to be that they emigrated as a family group to Philadelphia, to Pennsylvania, which by that time, by 1760, really had become the epicenter of migration from Ulster to America. So thousands of families were emigrating every year from Ulster, and many of them, a great many of them, were heading towards Pennsylvania.
So we know that, as you say, Pollock's, as with so many Irish and their Scottish background, Scots-Irish emigrating to America, what do we know when he settled in Pennsylvania? What do we know about the family's fortunes then, or what happened to him?
We really don't know much more about his own family who went with him to America. We know that Oliver himself settled initially in Carlisle in Pennsylvania. And that was like a growing centre for the Scots-Irish at that time. But not long after arriving in America, he had established himself in the business community in Philadelphia. And he did very well. He obviously was very skillful when it came to commerce and finance. He understood business. He built up trading links of the West Indies, and he became a very successful merchant within a relatively short period of time of arriving in America.
And it was through his connections. He was very, just from reading about him, he seems to have been very good networker in terms of building relationships with that. Obviously had a massive impact on his success in business. How successful did he become around that time, in the initial stages of his career?
Well, he did become successful, certainly. Now, he had built up good trading links with the West Indies, for example. He also had a skill for being able to work with a broad range of different people. So he wasn't narrowly focused, you might say, on his own people. He was able to build good links with the Spanish in the Caribbean, and also then later on in New Orleans. He was able to do deals with a broad range of different people in commerce. So really, you might say he wasn't limited in his outlook. He was prepared to expand his business and go wherever the opportunity took it. And that's what he did, and that's what he did very well. Now, news of his might say success had gone back to his remaining family in Ireland. And we have the letter I've mentioned already that was written from Master Mason in 1767, and that allows us to pinpoint, roughly speaking, where Pollock came from. But I'll read this letter just to give an indication of what it was like for the family back home. So let me read this. Dear brother, this is written to Oliver by his brother Charles in Maher Mason. Dear brother, I received yours, which gives me pleasure to hear of your welfare. I am to let you know that my misfortunes hurt me so much that I will be obliged to go to you if you do not come home. Having but one cow, was obliged to sell her for my poor helpless family. He mentions your uncle John and Miss Rosie desires you to come home as soon as possible. As for brother Thomas, he is very cruel to me. Wish you were at home to enjoy, for it would give me the greatest pleasure imaginable. And so on. So clearly, Charles is finding life difficult at home. He refers to the fact he had one cow, and he'd been obliged to sell her because of the position he was in, the financial position he was in. And there he's writing to his brother Oliver, who was a very successful merchant in America. And he's actually asking Oliver, it'd be great if you could come home. But clearly Oliver is not going to give up this life.
I suppose
in America
it shows really the American dream in a nutshell, that there was so many from Ireland going to America looking, and Oliver Pollock does well, but the letter shows us the poverty and the tough life that he left behind, for which members of his family were still going through. But we know that as far as we know, Pollock didn't come home. And he continued to do very well in America. The time that he was in America, it coincides with the time of the American Revolution, and he obviously gets involved in that from a financial point of view. What do we know about that aspect of his life?
Well, yes, that is something that was a very important part of his life. So it's interesting that when Charles wrote to Oliver in 1767, he directed his letter to Philadelphia. So Oliver still had some connection with Philadelphia, or at least that's what his brother thought. Lines of communication were dragged out over a broad period of time. It wasn't very long after that Oliver establishes himself, particularly in New Orleans, and provide some, you might say, broader context to that. After the 7 Years' War, which had ended in 1763, there were major changes in power in North America. So, for example, the French were forced to cede, eastern Canada to the British, and the French were also forced to cede the Louisiana area to the Spanish. So when Oliver Pollock, who'd already developed strong trading links in the Caribbean, when he moved to New Orleans, it was a Spanish controlled area. Having been French and having still many of its French characteristics, it's obvious just from the name New Orleans. Now, initially the Spanish takeover of New Orleans and Louisiana was not very popular, and there was you might say, an uprising against the Spanish, non-violent or supposedly non-violent, which resulted in then a larger Spanish force coming and settling in New Orleans. Now the extra troops and arriving in New Orleans and the general situation put enormous economic pressure on New Orleans, and it resulted in people being reduced to a very difficult situation with severe shortage of foodstuffs. But thanks to Oliver Pollock, he was able to import foodstuffs, import grain to New Orleans at a critical time, and also he didn't profit from what was that from that difficult situation. He could easily have made a fortune from selling grain to people who would have paid anything for it, but he didn't. He brought in grain and he sold it to people basically at market price, and in essence he averted a famine. And after that he was very much appreciated in New Orleans. And then over the coming years he continues to develop his trading links, continues to amass an absolute fortune through trade. And of course, in 1776, you have the Declaration of Independence, 4th of July, 1776, printed by a man, incidentally, who would have grown up not very far at all from where Oliver Pollock grew up, John Dunlap. And Pollock is clearly in very strong sympathy with the American patriots. He basically throws his lot in with their cause. And he writes numerous letters to the Continental Congress. This was essentially the body of the American patriots, the Continental Congress. The secretary of which was another Ulsterman, Charles Thompson, who grew up not very far away from where we are now, just outside Mahara. And Pollock writes numerous letters to the Continental Congress. He's encouraging them and he's suggesting ideas and so on. And in recognition of his willingness to support them, in 1777, he's appointed the commercial agent for the Continental Congress at New Orleans. In effect, he is their man in Louisiana. And through Pollock's influence with the Spanish, he actually brings the Spanish into the war on the side of the Americans. And he also invests heavily in the Patriot cause. He personally finances the American campaign in the Mississippi Valley, which was of crucial importance in securing a vast area for the American cause. So it's reckoned that he invested something like the modern equivalent of nearly $1 billion in the American war effort. I mean, that's a colossal sum of money when you think of it. And so he does support the Americans very strongly. He even accompanies, he even is out with the forces at times. So he exercises a hugely important influence in the American War of Independence on behalf of the Patriots.
And that finance was obviously a hugely important aspect of the battle and the war. But I wonder, is any ever suggestion that his Irish background may have played a part in his loyalties for the Patriots against the British?
Well, certainly many of his kinsmen and the other Scots-Irish back in Pennsylvania were very much in favour of the American cause during the War of Independence. And in general, you might say that the Scots-Irish were very much in favour of the Patriot cause during the War of Independence. It's in Pennsylvania where they make a very, very significant contribution, but they do so across the other colonies as well. And Pollock is obviously clearly a very astute businessman. He probably recognises that business and commerce and his own interests would be best served by the Americans winning. But there's no doubt that he had a personal attachment, that this was more than just something he did for pure financial reasons. He did have, you might say, an ideological sympathy with the American Revolution and with the Patriots.
At this time, obviously, his influence is strong. Well, what do we know about his personal life at the time he married a fellow Irish immigrant, wasn't it? And do we know much about his family life at that time?
He married Margaret O'Brien, who obviously was of Irish background, if not Irish birth. They were married for probably around about 30 years before she died in 1799, and they did have a family. Later on, then he married a widow, although they didn't have any children together, and he also outlived her.
Yeah, and the story goes that he donated gave all this money in support of the Patriot cause, but then he tried to get some of that money back in terms of, but that led to a really difficult phase in his life. What do we know about that period?
Yep. So he did. He made this personal contribution. He also took out loans to help the cause as well, and unfortunately, because of that, he became heavily in debt. Basically, whenever the American government didn't honour its commitments to him, he does end up at one point. He actually ends up in a debtor's prison for quite some time.
Was that in Cuba?
Yeah. It's supposed to be. That was in Havana. In Cuba. In 1782, he sent a letter to the Continental Congress seeking, some recovery of the money he had invested. So let me read part of this letter to you, because it's very interesting the way he phrases it. So this is his letter to the Continental Congress from September 1782. It has not been my fortune to move on in a splendid theatre, where the weary actor frequently finds in the applause of his audience new motives to exertion. I dwelt in an obscure corner of the universe, alone and unsupported. I have laboured without ceasing. I have neglected the road to affluence. I have exhausted my all and plunged myself deeply into debt to support the cause of America in the hours of her distress, and when those who called themselves our friends were daily deserting her. So here he's writing to the Continental Congress to try and recover some of his money. Now, unfortunately for him, Congress didn't provide the funds, but eventually through, he later tried to intervene with Thomas Jefferson, of course, was very much involved in the Patriot cause and became President of the United States. And eventually, long afterwards, he did recover his money, or at least a portion of his money. Quite how much he recovered, I'm not entirely sure. So, but he
certainly seems quite bitter about how it was treated.
Yes. Now he never, you might say, lost sympathy with the American dream, or felt that he shouldn't have done what he did. He was convinced that he had done the right thing in supporting the Patriot cause. But you might say the last 30 years of his life, or last even 40 years of his life, were in many ways spent trying to recover his fortune from earlier times. He even tried to enter politics for a time. He lived in a number of different places. He was back in Pennsylvania, lived in Baltimore for a time. But eventually he went to live with his daughter in Pinckneyville in Mississippi. And that's where he died in 1823. In, you might say, relative obscurity.
So the story that Kenny is fairly well known for now, but the story we want to explore a bit more about, he's credited with coming up with the dollar sign or inventing it, but it's maybe not so clear as that, but it's a great story in itself. What can you tell us about the story of him and the dollar sign?
Yeah, well, it's believed that Pollock was the man who devised the dollar sign, one of the most instantly recognizable signs in the world. So the story goes that because he was dealing with the Spanish in the Caribbean and in New Orleans, he was often using the peso, the currency, as his currency, the peso. And he would abbreviate the peso in such a way that it sort of came out to be the S with the two strokes through it, which became then the dollar sign that is so recognizable to this day. So it's believed that he was the one who came up with the dollar sign, basically because he was abbreviating the peso in such a way that it became.
And does he get the credit in America for that, or is it kind of a story that's told, or is he officially credited? Do we know of?
Well, I don't know if you would say he's officially credited. It's, he is the man, but it's certainly very strongly believed that he was the one, because I don't think there are necessarily many other possibilities for that. So I don't know if we can say with absolute 100% certainty, but it is widely attributed to him.
And there's a statue or a sculpture in his honour in Baton Rouge. What or who put that up, or when was that put up? Do we know that?
I'm not sure when that was put up.
It's a fairly modern.
It is, yes. Yeah. It's a modern sort of conceptualized sculpture. So yes, in Baton Rouge, I'm not 100% certain when that was actually placed there. Unfortunately, we don't have any portraits of him. Or even in the mid-19th century in America, apparently it was during the Civil War in America, a fire destroyed many of his personal effects, including perhaps portraits of him. So unfortunately, we don't know what he actually looked like. But as you say, there is a sculpture,
and the sculpture mentions about the dollar story, that he is seen as the man who invented the dollar sign. But in terms of his homeland, when he left all those years ago, and Bready, there's a real connection there, and there's a blue sign recognising him. So how important is characters like Pollock to the local area in terms of so many people left here to go to America, chasing that American dream, and so many of them achieved it, but so many others didn't. But how important do you feel that it is to recognise those links?
Oh, it is important, and it's interesting just how it came about. It was back in 2007, and my colleague Dr. Brian Trainer and I were speaking in Philadelphia. We're giving a presentation on behalf of the Ulster Historical Foundation, and John Polk, who lives in Maryland, was in attendance in that, and he showed me this letter, which he had found in the Library of Congress. And
was he a connection? Did he think, was he a connection of Pollock's?
Not necessarily a direct connection, but he is somebody who's very interested in the Polk or Pollock genealogy. So he's a Polk, but as I said, Polk is a version of Pollock. So he's very much involved in researching the Pollock and Polk family. So he had found this letter, and he was kind enough to give me a copy of it. And then when I came back to...
so before that, we didn't really know Pollock's story in terms of the Bready connection, right?
No, okay. Not at all, actually. In fact, many accounts had said he was from Coleraine.
Yeah.
But it was the discovery of this letter that allowed us to focus our research and focus our attention on the Bready area. And when I came back from America, I remember going to the local group in Bready, the Bready Ulster Scots Development Association, and James Key, and telling them, that did you know the man who invented the dollar symbol came from Bready? And I think that just blew everyone away. It was just such an incredible story that somebody who came from, a small rural community in County Tyrone had made such an impact, not only in, you might say, changing the course of history in the American War of Independence, but then leaving a legacy in the dollar sign. So in 2016, a blue plaque was unveiled at the Solace Centre in Bready to Oliver Pollock and celebrating his local connection, and then acknowledging that he was the man credited with devising the dollar sign. So that was in 2016, spring of 2016, and it was erected by the Ulster History Circle, and I think it was the 200th blue plaque that had been unveiled by the Ulster History Circle, and the guest of honour was the US consul. He was the man who we pulled the string which revealed the plaque behind the curtain. That was Daniel Lawton. So it was a very special occasion for the local community to have someone who was from the area and who had gone on to achieve great things across the Atlantic.
And do you feel that there's so many stories that still to be told, in the sense that you were explaining there that it was always a bit of luck that we found out about Pollock's story in terms of those connections that you came across in America. But the story of the Irish going to America, how important is that we keep looking into this story and keep telling those experiences of the Irish immigrants?
Yeah, well, there's not a family on this island isn't touched in some way by immigration. Whether even today, presently, you know, many people have cousins or even a sibling in another part of the world. It could be America, it could be Canada, Australia, New Zealand, even across in Britain. Historically, of course, immigration has had a massive impact on our history in the departure of so many individuals and families seeking a better life in another part of the world. And today, of course, many of their descendants are coming back to Ireland in search of their roots and in search of the connections and wanting to, even just wanting to stand at the side of the old homestead or visit the graveyard where their ancestors are buried. Maybe there's no headstone there today, but there's something poignant about being able to visit the grave of your ancestors, the place where they buried their dead, or visit the church where they were married or baptized their children. So yes, those connections are immensely important in terms of helping us to understand more about our history and the impact that immigration has had on it, but also the legacy of those who have left these shores.